When my daughter-in-law told me to leave, I smiled instead of crying. I remember that moment so clearly. The way the morning light was falling across the kitchen table. The way my coffee was still warm in my favorite blue mug. She stood there, by the sink, not looking at me. She was looking at the window, at the nothing outside. And she said, "Ma, we think it's time for you to go home." Home. It's a funny little word, isn't it? Such a small word for such a big feeling. I looked at her, and I felt something crack, deep inside my chest. But my face stayed calm. I smiled. I smiled because I didn't want her to see the crack. I smiled because I didn't want to make her uncomfortable in her own kitchen. I smiled because, in that moment, I realized I was a guest in my own son's house. It wasn't always like this. I had to go back, you see, back to the beginning, to understand how I ended up standing in a kitchen, smiling at my own eviction. My son, Mark. He was my whole world. His father left when Mark was just 3 years old. Just walked out one Tuesday evening for a pack of cigarettes and never came back. It was just the two of us against the world. I worked double shifts at the diner downtown. My feet would ache by the end of the night, a deep, throbbing ache that would keep me awake. But I'd soak them in Epsom salts, and in the morning, I'd make Mark his pancakes before school. I'd watch him eat, his little jaw working, milk mustache on his upper lip. And I would think, this is for you. Every ache, every penny, every long night is for you. I wanted him to have a life I couldn't give myself. A life with a lawn. A life with a father. A life with a big, happy family. And he did it. He worked hard, got a scholarship, became an accountant. He met a girl, Susan. She was pretty, quiet. Came from a nice family where the mother didn't work double shifts. When they got married, I cried. Happy tears. The kind of tears you cry when a prayer you've been whispering for 30 years finally gets answered. When the grandkids came, first Lily, then Thomas, I thought my heart would burst. This was it. This was the reward. All those years of hard work, of loneliness, they were paying off. I was a grandmother. I would drive the 2 hours to their big house in the suburbs every weekend. I'd bring my meatloaf, the one Mark loved as a boy. I'd hold the babies, change their diapers, sing them the same lullabies my mother sang to me. For a while, it was perfect. Susan was polite. She'd thank me for the food, for the help. Mark would pat my shoulder and say, "Thanks, Ma." I'd sit on their plush sofa, holding a sleeping Lily, and feel a peace I hadn't felt in decades. I was part of something. I was needed. Then, about 5 years ago, things started to change. I was getting older. The stairs in my little 2-story apartment were getting harder. I had a fall one winter, slipping on some ice outside the grocery store. Nothing broke, but it shook me up. I was alone for 3 days before anyone noticed. The mailman finally called the police. Mark and Susan came to see me in the hospital. They sat on either side of the bed, looking at each other with those looks that married people have. The looks that say a whole conversation without words. Finally, Mark took my hand. "Ma," he said, his voice soft. "We've been talking. It's not safe for you here alone. We have the spare room. The one above the garage. It has its own little bathroom. Why don't you come live with us?" It felt like a rescue. Like the ending to a story I'd been waiting for. My son was bringing me home. I sold my little apartment, gave away my furniture, my plants, most of my books. I packed my life into a few suitcases. The things I couldn't bear to part with. My mother's sewing kit. Mark's baby shoes. A few photo albums. The room above the garage was nice. Clean. White walls. A bed that smelled like lavender. Susan had put a little vase with a fake flower on the nightstand. It was thoughtful. But from my window, I could see the main house. I could see the warm yellow light in the kitchen window every night. I could see them, Mark, Susan, Lily, and Thomas, sitting around the dinner table. I could see them laughing, talking. I could see their life. And I was watching it from a distance like a movie playing on a screen. At first, I was invited for dinner every night. "Come on down, Ma," Mark would yell from the back door. I'd shuffle across the little path, excited to be with them. But slowly, the invitations became less frequent. "Lily has a piano lesson tonight, Ma. We'll eat early." Thomas as a game. We'll just grab something on the go. We're having a couple over for a work thing. It might be boring for you. So I started eating in my room. A sandwich. Some soup I'd heat in the little microwave they'd put out there. I'd sit on the edge of my bed, chewing slowly, listening to the hum of the garage below me. I was so close to them. Just a few steps away from their warmth. But I felt a million miles away. The hardest part was the grandkids. When I first moved in, they loved my room. It was Grandma's special hideout. They'd come up, we'd play cards, I'd tell them stories about their dad when he was little. But as they got older, they got busier. And I started to notice a change. A hesitation. One afternoon, Lily, she must have been about 10, came up to see me. She looked around the room, at my few things. "Grandma," she asked, her little forehead wrinkled, "why don't you live in the house with us?" I smiled. "Because Grandma has her own special place here, sweetie." She shook her head. "But Mommy says you live in the guest room. She says we have to be quiet because you're a guest." The word hit me like a stone. Guest. I wasn't Grandma living with the family. I was a guest. Someone to be quiet for. Someone who was visiting. It was the first time the word was spoken out loud, and it came from the mouth of a child. Things with Susan became formal. She was never mean. She was never cruel. That's the thing I have to tell you. It wasn't cruelty. It was politeness. And politeness, when it comes from your family, can be colder than ice. She would knock on my door before coming in. She would ask, "Is it okay if the kids play in the yard today? We don't want to disturb your rest." She would make sure I had my own milk in my own small refrigerator, so I wouldn't have to use theirs. I was being managed. Managed like a piece of fine china you don't want to get broken. I was being housed, not loved. I was being tolerated, not welcomed. I was a guest. Mark, my Mark. He changed. He became busy, always busy. He'd wave at me from the driveway, rushing to his car. He'd pop his head in the door on Sundays for 5 minutes. "Everything okay, Ma? Need anything?" And before I could even answer, he'd be gone. I think it was easier for him not to see. Not to see the quiet in my eyes, the loneliness in my room. He wanted to believe I was happy. He wanted to believe he'd done a good thing. The turning point wasn't one big fight. It was 1,000 little paper cuts. It was a Thanksgiving where I was seated at the end of the table, away from the conversation. It was a Christmas morning when I watched the kids open presents from my armchair, not from the floor with them. It was a birthday card for Mark that just said, "Love, Mark and family," not even a personal note. The moment I knew for sure, the moment the crack in my chest became a canyon, was a Tuesday night. It was raining, just like today. I couldn't sleep. My hip was hurting. I decided to make myself a cup of tea. I had run out of my little tea bags, so I thought, I'll just go to the main house kitchen. They won't mind. It's the middle of the night. I put on my robe and my slippers and walked quietly across the wet path. I let myself in the back door. The kitchen was dark, but the light from the hallway was on. As I reached for the light switch, I heard voices. Mark and Susan. They were in the living room, talking low. They didn't hear me. "It's not working, Mark." Susan's voice. Tired. Frustrated. "Give it time," Mark said. I could hear the weariness in his voice, too. Time? It's been 4 years. I feel like I can't breathe in my own home. I have to watch what I wear, what I say, what I cook. She's always there. Just up there. Watching. She's not watching, Susan. She is. And the kids. Lily asked me the other day why Grandma doesn't have a life. And I didn't know what to say. Because she doesn't. Her life is here. With us. And I'm tired, Mark. I'm tired of being responsible for her happiness. I stood there in the dark kitchen, my hand frozen an inch from the light switch. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure they could hear it. I wasn't angry at Susan. I understood. Every word she said was true. I was the weight. I was the burden. I was the silent presence in the room above the garage that was slowly suffocating their family. Mark was quiet for a long time. Then he spoke, so quietly, I barely heard him. "What do you want me to do?" "I don't know," Susan whispered. "But something has to change. We need our house back." I slipped out of the kitchen as quietly as I had come. I went back to my room, my lavender-smelling prison, and I sat on the edge of my bed until the sun came up. I didn't cry. I was too tired to cry. I just sat there, and I watched the light change from black to gray to pale yellow. And I knew. I couldn't stay. So when Susan came to see me the next morning, I was prepared. She knocked softly on my door. I opened it and I smiled. "Good morning, Susan. Would you like some coffee? I just made a pot in my little machine." She stepped in, looking uncomfortable. She sat on the edge of my bed. She looked around at my tiny, tidy room, at the single photo of Mark as a boy, at my mother's sewing kit on the dresser. "Ma," she began. She never called me Ma. It was always Eleanor or Mark's mom. So when she said Ma, I knew. I held up my hand, gently. "It's okay, Susan. I know." She looked up at me, surprised. Her eyes were wide, and for a second, she looked like a scared little girl, not a busy mother of two. "I heard you last night," I said, my voice even. "In the kitchen. I came down for tea." The color drained from her face. "Oh, Ma, I'm so sorry." "I didn't mean we didn't mean." I sat down in my armchair, facing her. "You didn't say anything that wasn't true." I took a sip of my coffee. It was cold. "I've been thinking all night. You're right. This isn't working. I'm not part of your family here. I'm a responsibility. And that's not fair to you, or to Mark, or to the kids." Tears started to well up in her eyes. "I never wanted to be cruel." "I know," I said. "And I meant it. You were never cruel. You were just honest. And I need to be honest too. I need to go somewhere where I'm not a guest. Where I belong." The next few weeks were a blur of quiet conversations and practical arrangements. Mark was torn. I could see the guilt in his eyes. He'd come to my room and just sit there, not saying anything. I'd reach over and pat his hand. "It's okay, baby," I'd say. "It's for the best." I found a place. A small apartment in a senior living community about an hour away. It wasn't fancy. Just one bedroom, a little kitchen, a living room. But it was mine. The rent was based on my Social Security. I could just afford it. They had a community room where they played bingo on Tuesdays and a little library. It was a place for people like me. People who were living their own lives, not just watching someone else's. The day I left, it was raining again. Susan helped me pack my suitcases. She was quiet, efficient. She folded my clothes with a care that felt like an apology. Lily and Thomas came to say goodbye. They looked sad. They didn't really understand. I gave them each a hug, and I told them to come visit me in my new apartment. "I'll have a whole building full of grandmas," I said, trying to make them smile. Mark carried my suitcases to the car. He put them in the trunk and closed the lid. He stood there in the rain, getting wet, not seeming to notice. Finally, he looked at me. His eyes were red. "I'm sorry, Ma," he whispered. "I'm so sorry. I failed you." I reached up and cupped his wet face in my hands, the same way I did when he was a little boy with a scraped knee. "You didn't fail me, Mark. You gave me a home when I needed one. Now you need to give your wife and children a home. A real one. Without me in the way. That's not failure. That's being a good father." My new apartment is small. The walls are a little thin, and I can hear my neighbor, Mrs. Gable, watching her television shows at night. But the window in my living room faces a little courtyard with a bird feeder. I sit here, in my own chair, and I watch the sparrows fight over the seeds. And I feel something I haven't felt in a long time. I feel peace. It took a while. At first, I was lonely. The silence was different here. It was my silence, not the silence of waiting to be invited. I started going to the bingo games. I joined a little book club. We read romance novels and mysteries, nothing too heavy. I met a woman named Helen who lost her husband 10 years ago. We have coffee together every Wednesday morning in the community room. We talk about our kids, our aches and pains, the good old days. She doesn't feel sorry for me. She just listens. Mark comes to visit. At first, it was every weekend, stiff and full of guilt. Now it's every other weekend, and it's easier. He brings the kids sometimes. We sit in the courtyard, and feed the birds together. Lily told me about her first school dance. Thomas showed me a magic trick he learned. And I'm not just watching their life. I'm in it. For those few hours, I'm grandma. Just grandma. Not a guest. Not a burden. Just grandma. Susan came with him once. She stood in my tiny living room looking around. At my few things, at my mother's sewing kit on the shelf, at Mark's baby shoes on the windowsill. She looked uncomfortable at first. Then she saw a picture of me and Mark at the diner from when he was a teenager. "I've never seen this one," she said softly. "It was a good day," I said. "He came to visit me at work. Ate 3 hamburgers." She smiled a real smile. "He still loves hamburgers." "I know," I said. She looked at me then and I saw it. The apology. Not in words but in her eyes. And I accepted it. I had to. Holding on to the hurt would be like drinking poison and expecting her to die. It would only hurt me did I think about that morning in the kitchen often. The one where she told me to leave. I think about how I smiled instead of crying. I understand that smile now. It wasn't about hiding my pain from her. It was about accepting a truth. The truth that a mother's job is to build a nest for her children, and then, when the time comes, to let them build their own. Sometimes, the hardest part of loving someone is knowing when to step back, when to let go, when to stop being a part of their daily life, so you can finally find your own peace. I was a guest in my son's house, but I am home in my own small room. I am the host of my own quiet life. And that is enough. That is more than enough. The lesson I learned is this: don't wait for an invitation to feel like you belong. Build your own table, even if it's a small one. Set a place for yourself. You'd be surprised who might come and sit with you. And you'd be surprised how sweet the tea tastes when you're the one who poured it.